I used to work the night shift at a gas station convenience store off a quiet stretch of highway. I say used to because after what happened a few months ago, I will never work a night shift again. It was a small station, the kind that barely got any business once it got late. Most of my shift was spent restocking shelves, wiping down counters, and occasionally ringing up a trucker or traveler passing through. I remember the whole thing vividly. It was just past 2:30 in the morning. By then, even the truckers had mostly dried up, leaving me with nothing to do. I scrolled mindlessly on my phone, trying to kill time. At one point, I stepped outside for some air, rubbing my hands together against the cold. My breath disappeared into the night as I exhaled. The parking lot was empty, just the pumps, the road, and a dark stretch of trees beyond. The neon sign flickered faintly, and the air was thick with moisture. Even with the highway nearby, it was eerily silent. As I turned to head back inside, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. My head whipped around, and I realized there was a person standing behind one of the pumps. How had I not noticed him earlier? He wore a dark red hoodie with the hood up, hands shoved into his pockets. There wasn't a car in sight, so he obviously wasn't fueling up. Yet, he wasn't walking toward the store either. He just stood there, half-turned, watching me. At first, I figured he might be waiting for someone, but something about the way he moved unsettled me. He shuffled in a slow, circular pattern. I quickly went inside, keeping an eye on him through the glass. I hoped someone would pull up and pick him up, but after a few minutes, he started walking toward the door, slow at first, then suddenly pushing inside like he had made up his mind all at once. He approached the counter, but didn't say anything right away. He just stared at me, like he was sizing me up. Then, in a rushed, almost rehearsed way, he muttered that his car had broken down just before the pumps. He said he needed a jump or maybe a little gas to get to the next town. His story wasn't convincing. He wasn't even trying to make it believable. I offered to call a tow truck instead. No, he said too quickly, shaking his head. He just needed a flashlight, maybe some help checking under the hood. Something was definitely off. The way he spoke, the way he watched my reaction, it felt like a test. To be fair, people who come into gas stations at that hour are often a little strange. Maybe he really did need help and was just an odd guy. Or maybe he was on something. I asked where his car was parked. He pointed at the monitor behind me. I turned to look at the screen, and to my surprise, there actually was a car parked just beyond the highway entrance. For a moment, I felt guilty for doubting him. But then it hit me. I had just been outside. There had been no car there. My stomach twisted as I glanced back at the monitor. That's when I noticed the slightest movement near the back bumper. Someone was crouching just out of view. A cold wave of dread hit me. Forcing a casual smile, I agreed to help but told him I needed to grab my phone from the back office. I turned slowly, not wanting to spook him. The second I was out of his direct sight, I slammed my hand onto the emergency panic button under the counter. The alarm shrieked through the store. I expected him to attack me, but what he did instead was even more unsettling. His nervous energy disappeared. No more fake urgency. No more shifting from foot to foot. He actually relaxed. His whole posture shifted, and then he smiled. Not a panicked smile, not an embarrassed one. A slow, knowing grin, like he had all the time in the world. Like this was amusing to him. I was in shock. I didn't even have time to react before he turned and bolted. I ran to the monitors just in time to see both of them take off, not toward the car, but into the woods behind the station. The car just sat there, engine off, headlights off, no one inside. By the time the police arrived, everything was exactly as I had seen it. The car was still there, but the men were gone. No footprints leading away. No sign of them anywhere. Then, one of the officers pointed something out, something I hadn't noticed before. The front passenger door was open. There had been a third person inside the whole time. The police took my statement, and I handed over the surveillance footage. A few days later, they followed up. The car had been towed, and the plates ran. It had been reported stolen nearly a week earlier, over 100 miles away. No one came forward to claim it. No reports of missing persons. No other crimes linked to it. Just an abandoned vehicle in the middle of nowhere with no explanation. That was months ago. Still nothing. I don't know why convenience stores are such popular targets, but I do know one thing. I will never work another night shift again. My name is Cadence, and I work the closing shift at a small dive bar in the quieter part of town. The place sits right off the highway, but the parking lot also has a back entrance accessible to the locals. It's nothing fancy, just a dimly lit spot where the regulars know each other by name, and the jukebox has been playing the same rotation of classic rock for years. Most of our customers are locals, truckers passing through and the occasional lost tourist looking for a stiff drink. I like it. The routine is predictable. The tips are decent, and I've learned how to handle the usual bar crowd. The talkers, the flirters, the quiet drinkers, and the ones who just want to be left alone. Weekends get hectic, but during the week, I work my night shifts alone. No bar back, no extra staff, just me. It's easier work, but I miss the company of my co-workers. I stay vigilant, though, because we do get the occasional bar fight, given the kind of crowd we attract. That's why I noticed him immediately. It was sometime after 1 in the morning on a Tuesday when he walked in. If I had to guess, he was in his late 40s, but he was extremely clean-cut and well-groomed. An unusual look for a man his age in a place like this. He wore a black turtleneck under a black trench coat, dressed well but effortlessly. He carried himself with an air of sophistication that made you think of money. Real money, not the flashy kind. He scanned the room slowly before making his way to the bar and taking his seat. I also remember his oddly good posture, but that's neither here nor there. When I walked over, he glanced at the bottles behind me and ordered something top shelf without hesitation. As I poured his drink, he smiled and asked if I liked working there. It was a normal enough question, so I answered honestly, saying I did. I even cracked a joke about bartending. I wish I could say I got a creepy vibe from him, but I didn't. He seemed like a genuinely decent guy, like the single dad at a kid's baseball game who high-fives the whole team. We chatted for a bit, which I didn't mind since the bar was slow. Eventually, he asked if I had ever thought about doing something bigger. It was a strange question, but not completely inappropriate given the casual conversation. I gave him my usual bartender smile and said I was happy for now. He nodded, took a sip of his drink, and seemed disappointed by my answer for reasons I didn't understand. After a long pause, he asked what time I got off. That caught me off guard. He hadn't been flirting, not even subtly, so it was disappointing to think our conversation had just been another attempt to get my number. I smiled and gave him a vague answer, brushing him off in a friendly way. Before he could respond, I busied myself wiping down the counter, but he didn't press. He just smiled like he already knew. Then he finished his drink, laid a crisp $100 bill on the bar like it was nothing, and walked out into the night. I didn't think much of the encounter at the time. He was odd, but I figured I'd never see him again. I was wrong. A week later, he came back, but this time he wasn't alone. A woman accompanied him. She looked to be in her mid-30s, but was dressed like someone trying too hard to blend in with a younger crowd. Her style was trendy, but slightly off. Everything about her seemed calculated. The way she smiled too easily. The way she leaned against the bar like we were already friends. As I set down napkins in front of them, the first thing she said wasn't a hello or a drink order, but a compliment. "You're so pretty," she said, flashing an overly joyful smile. Her fingers brushed my arm as she said it, lingering a little too long. I laughed and thanked her, but I could tell something was off. The man who had been so talkative last time didn't speak at all. They ordered drinks, and as I poured them, the questions started flooding in. How long have you worked here? How old are you? Do you like your job? It felt less like small talk and more like an interview. I answered politely but briefly. At one point, she glanced at the man beside her, and it felt like they were communicating without speaking. Then she turned back to me and told me she ran an exclusive event club. Lowering her voice, she said she was always looking for young, fun people for private parties, and that I'd make a killing, 10 grand for a weekend. I let out a small, forced laugh and told her it sounded too good to be true. She insisted it was real, saying plenty of girls like me work for them. Her smile never wavered. She kept repeating the same words: fun, safe, exclusive. Then casually she said, "You should step outside for a second. There's someone who can explain it better." My pulse spiked. I wasn't playing along anymore. "I'm good," I said firmly, my smile gone. Just then, a group of customers walked in, laughing and talking loudly. The woman's expression changed in an instant. Her friendly mask slipped just slightly before she turned to the man beside her. Without another word, they left. I was unsettled. These strangers had just propositioned me for God knows what. I told my boss and co-workers about the encounter. We agreed to keep an eye out, and my boss assured me he was only 15 minutes away if I needed him. The security cameras were enough to deter most troublemakers, but there wasn't much else we could do. It's not like they had done anything illegal. I tried to move past it, but a few nights later, after closing, I saw the car. It was parked across the street, engine off, just sitting there. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As I walked to my car, I kept my head down, my keys clutched tight in my hand. When I pulled out of the lot, I checked my mirrors. The car followed me. It stayed just far enough back to avoid suspicion, but every turn I made, it was still there. I turned onto a side street. It followed. Another turn. Still there. My stomach tightened. I knew it was I forced myself to stay calm. Then, without hesitation, I pulled into the parking lot of a police station, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The second I pulled in, the car sped off. This happened a couple of weeks ago. I worked the night shift at Walmart. It's not the worst job in the world, but after a while, it starts to feel like you're just floating through time. The nights blend together. Same shelves, same routine, same dull hum of the overhead lights. Hopefully, something better comes along. I usually stock the electronics section, which is nice because it's quieter than other areas. People don't exactly rush in at 2 a.m. to buy phone chargers and Bluetooth speakers. Most customers are either night owls killing time or truckers grabbing last-minute supplies before heading back on the road. That's why I noticed him. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just another guy wandering the aisles, probably waiting for someone. But after a few minutes, I realized he wasn't shopping. He wasn't even pretending to. He just kept appearing. Every time I glanced up, he was nearby, hovering in the next aisle over or standing too still by the clearance section. He wasn't looking at anything. He was just standing there, watching me. I told myself I was overthinking it. The store is big, and maybe he was just taking his time. But the way he moved, always just close enough for me to notice, never actually picking anything up, set something deep in my gut on edge. I was waiting for him to just get on with it and ask for my number, but he never approached me. It was like he wanted me to see him, which didn't make any sense. I went to radio someone about it, but realized the batteries in my radio must have been dead because it wasn't working. I debated whether I should go find a manager when I suddenly felt a hand wrap around my arm. I nearly jumped out of my skin, but before I could react, a woman's voice rang out, loud, friendly, overly familiar. "There you are," she exclaimed, launching into a cheerful spiel about how she had been looking all over for me. I turned, completely thrown off, and saw a woman I had never seen before in my life. She was smiling, her grip firm on my arm, like we were old friends reuniting. Before I could say anything, she leaned in and whispered, her tone dropping to something low and urgent. "That guy's been recording you. Follow me." My stomach dropped. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance back. The man was still there. Only now, he wasn't even pretending to browse. He was staring right at me. A cold wave of fear crept over me. I let her pull me along without question. The way she grabbed my arm, the way she spoke so loud and casually, like we were two old friends, I clung to it. I was beyond grateful that someone had realized what was going on and put herself in an uncomfortable position just to help me. She kept up the act as we walked, rambling about something. Maybe a trip she had taken, maybe an inside joke we supposedly shared. I barely processed the words. My thoughts were stuck on him. Had he really been recording me? That was creepy as hell. I wanted to know if he was still following us, but I couldn't muster the courage to turn around just yet. The woman steered me through the aisles, moving fast. I barely noticed where we were going, only that we were going, that the distance between me and that man was growing. Honestly, I was kind of expecting her to drop the act at some point, but she didn't. At one point, it started feeling a little too much, so I glanced behind me. To my relief, that man was no longer following, but the woman kept pulling me forward. I told her we were good now, that we should probably find my manager, but she just squeezed my arm tighter. "He's still lurking," she insisted. I hesitated. So what was he going to do in a store full of employees? I had been scared at first because no one was around, but now that I wasn't alone, I started realizing there wasn't much of a reason to be afraid anymore. I told her this, but she kept moving. I planted my feet, twisting my arms slightly to loosen her grip. "You can let go now," I said. She didn't. She smiled at me, but something about it was off. "Come on, just a little further," she said, tugging me forward. I glanced around. The store was nearly empty. We had moved past the registers, past the self-checkout, past the aisles that saw the most foot traffic. The warehouse section loomed ahead, dimly lit, nearly empty. Beyond that was the side exit, the one without cameras, the one employees used for loading shipments. That's when it dawned on me. She was leading me straight to the exit. I didn't think. I screamed for help, yanking my arm free with all my strength. She lost her grip, just enough for me to pull free. I didn't waste another second. I turned and ran toward the front of the store. As I fled, she yelled something behind me. She yelled for me to come back. Then she yelled my name. I hadn't told her my name. I kept running until I saw one of my coworkers sprinting toward me, reacting to my screams. I told them to call security, which they promptly did. But by the time I told my story to the guards, the woman and the man were nowhere in sight. Security reviewed the footage. Just as I suspected, the woman and the man had walked into the store together. She had been with him the entire time. The man's face was clear as day in one of the frames, but hers always turned away. I had a feeling she was a mastermind behind the whole thing, so it infuriated me that the cameras hadn't picked up her face. Every second of it had been planned. The police got involved, and the whole thing was officially classified as a failed abduction attempt. I'm still waiting for a resolution. That man should be easy to track down. His face was caught on camera. But I have no idea how that woman knew my name. And that's what terrifies me the most. Those people hadn't just picked me at random. I was a direct target.